to talk about the family preference categories. So we've been getting a lot of requests from people to address this because they're kind of concerned or they don't really understand what exactly these family preference categories are, how it works. And this is specifically when we're talking about petitioning for your family members through spouse petitions, parent petitions, sibling petitions, when you're doing consular processing. How does it exactly work? What is this thing called preference categories? Who does it apply to? And how do you figure out how to use the charts on the Visa Bulletin? So let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is who is an immediate relative versus who is a non-immediate relative. So an immediate relative is the spouse of a U.S. citizen, the minor child, anyone under the age of 21, and the parent. And who is a non-immediate relative? A non-immediate relative is the spouse or child of a green card holder, any children of U.S. citizens over the age of 21, and of course married children and siblings. So why is it important to understand who is a immediate relative and who is a non-immediate relative? It's important because based on what category they fall into, the petitions you file for them will either be processed in a very fast manner, or they will take a certain amount of time and you have to undergo a different kind of process or wait for a visa, etc. Therefore, it's important to understand. So when you're a U.S. citizen, it's great because your relatives, parents, spouse, children under the age of 21, because they're immediate relatives, once you apply for them, you don't have to wait a while for a visa to become available and for your relative to go to the consulate, get an interview, and then come over here. This is great. Unfortunately, when you're not a U.S. citizen, or if you're a U.S. citizen with children over the age of 21 and married, or you're trying to petition for your siblings, you have to wait for something called your priority date to be current and for a visa to become available. And what is the reason for this? The reason for this is that there is a limit to the number of visas available for family petitions. There is not an unlimited number. So that number is 226,000, and it means that there are way more people than this number that apply in the course of a year. And so the United States government has broken this down into different categories in order of which family members they consider to be a priority or give preference to, and then allow people to then immigrate over here and get a visa, because there are different family members that get different preferences. So let me go into the different preference categories. As I explained earlier, if you are an immediate relative, this doesn't apply to you. As soon as a petition, a family petition, is approved, your application will get sent to the National Visa Center and they will start processing it. You don't have to wait a year, you don't have to wait 5 years, 14 years. It immediately gets there and they undergo the process. However, if you're not an immediate relative, you then have to go and look at what preference category you fall into to determine how long it's going to take for your application to be processed, and then for NVC to contact you so that you can undergo the process of applying for a visa and come to the United States. So there are 4 preference categories. The first preference is for unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens who are over the age of 21. And remember, this is because anyone under the age of 21, they're an immediate relative. The number of visas available in this category are 23,400. So it might seem like a big number, but actually it's not, because there are way more people that apply than this number over here. The second preference category is broken down into second preference category A and second preference category B. So in the A category, it's children who are unmarried and under the age of 21 and the spouses of green card holders. And then in the second category, in this second preference, it's unmarried sons and daughters of green card holders who are at least 21 years old. And how many visas are available for them? So for the first category, spouses and children of permanent residents. So there's kind of a bit of a calculation that takes place. It's not an exact number. It's 77% of the overall preference limit, and then of which 75% are exempt from the per country limit. What does this mean? This means they're looking at the overall number of visas available, how many have been used in the previous category, and then what's left over and can be applied over here based on the limit that they've set for this category for visas to be available. For unmarried sons and daughters, 21 years of age or older of green card holders, again, it's a percentage, is 23% of the overall second preference limitation. These numbers might seem a little confusing to you. Don't worry about them right now. What you just need to know is that there's a limit to the number of visas available for each category. The third preference category is for married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. And here, the number of visas available are 23,400 plus any numbers that weren't used in the previous preference categories. And finally, the fourth category is brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. And the number of visas available here is 65,000 plus any numbers not available in the first three. So as you can see, there's a bit of a hierarchy, right? So first, it's children over the age of 21 of U.S. citizens. So we're taking care of the children of U.S. citizens. Then it's children who are unmarried and under the age of 21 of green card holders and spouses of green card holders. And then we're looking at unmarried sons and daughters of green card holders who are over 21. And then we're looking at married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens who are over 21. And then finally, we're looking at brothers and sisters. So brothers and sisters are, of course, at the end because spouses and children take priority, and then whatever is left will go to the siblings. And keep in mind that a green card holder cannot petition for their parent. A green card holder, unfortunately, has to wait to become a U.S. citizen because only U.S. citizens can petition for their parents, and parents are considered immediate relatives, which is great because if you want to petition for your parent, you want them to come soon. You don't want to wait years and years for them to be available over here. So these preference categories, why are they important and when do they come into play? So let's say you filed a petition for your spouse, your child, your parent, or your sibling, and now a year has passed, etc., whatnot, and you're trying to figure out, one, when is this going to get approved? And after this is approved, when can my family member who's outside of the United States apply for their visa and come over here? So again, and I keep on repeating this because it's important to remember, if you're a U.S. citizen, once the petition is approved, you don't have to wait. NVC will contact you almost immediately. Sometimes it's as fast as a week. Sometimes it could be a few weeks, about a month usually. And they'll give you the directions to set up your visa application with NVC, start putting together your documents to start processing all of that. However, if you're a non-immediate relative, after that petition gets approved, so let's say it's for your spouse, your green card holder is for your spouse, or your U.S. citizen is for your child over 21, etc., you have to wait. Just because it's approved doesn't mean NVC is going to contact you right away. Instead, you have to look at something called the Visa Bulletin, and I'm going to go into that a little bit, to see where NVC is right now at this moment, to see what applications they are processing right now. And how do they do that? They do that by priority date. So priority date is something that will be listed on the receipt of the application. After you submit it, it'll list what the priority date is. That's the date that they look at to determine which applications are now going to be considered for visa processing. How do you apply this information? So if you have a petition and you want to figure out when the next step will happen, you have to look at something called the Visa Bulletin. This is available online and it's provided by the National Visa Center. And essentially it's a way for you and them to kind of track where they are with the applications and for you to figure out how long it's going to take before they get to your relative's application. Every month, the Visa Bulletin is updated. Sometimes you'll see that they really haven't moved much. They're still kind of on the same priority date. The priority date is usually the date when they have received the application, so it falls around that time. So let's say you applied in February 10 of 2017. So your priority date will be around that date. And you have to look at the Visa Bulletin to see when that year is going to come up, that date and year is going to come up. Telling you all of this may not be as easy to follow. The best way to understand this is by going online and taking a look at the Visa Bulletin. I wish I could share a screen with you and go over it with you simultaneously. So we'll do that in a workshop in the future so that I can make it more clear. But I can at least try to explain this to you. So when you log onto the Visa Bulletin site, you'll see that there are two charts. There's one chart that says final action dates for family-sponsored preference categories, and another one that says dates for filing family-sponsored applications. And then you'll see two more charts. The first two at the top are for the family petitions, and the second two at the bottom are for employer-based petitions, so where an employer has sponsored you. In this case, we're talking about the first two. So you'll notice that the final action date chart is at the top, and the second one is the dates for filing family-sponsored applications. It's not the first one that you look at after the petition has been approved. It's the second chart that you'll look at. Why is this important? It's important because they give you two different kinds of information. The Visa Bulletin is kind of like a waiting list. It tells you where they are, and by looking at the Visa Bulletin, you're going to figure out how soon they are, how close they are to sending you a notice to start putting together the documents, and you can submit the application with the National Visa Center. So let's see what I want to tell you. So the dates for the filing, that second chart that I told you about, that tells us the earliest dates that you can apply for a green card. So these are the dates that NVC uses to notify you. So let's say you've had a sibling petition pending for about 10 years or something like that, 10 or 12 years. Take a look at the Visa Bulletin. Is the date under the category of your relative? So if it's your siblings, the category is F4. What is the date over there? Is that close to the priority date that you have on the receipt? If it's close, or once it gets close to that, NVC is going to contact you and you can start the process of putting together the visa application and all the documents that they request. It doesn't mean that as soon as you submit the documents and you file the visa application, your relative is going to get called. Instead, you have to look at the chart now at the top for the final action dates. Because what does that chart represent? That chart represents when an immigrant visa is available. Immigrant visa needs to be available in order for your relative to come here and get a green card. So until it becomes current and it's available, it doesn't matter, they cannot get the green card. So that's why it's really, really important for you to look at both of these charts to understand where your application is for your family relative, to get an idea of the time frame in which NVC is going to contact you, and how long you have to wait for the interview, when the visa becomes available, and then for you to get the green card. So I have provided a lot of information over here. This is something that is very, very confusing for people, and I gave you kind of numbers and I'm talking about different categories. The best way I can explain this is, depending on your status as a green card holder or a U.S. citizen, there are certain relatives that you can apply for, And if your relatives fall within the immediate family category, your spouses of U.S. citizens, children under the age of 21, and parents, the applications are going to go very fast. You don't have to wait. There aren't any other things that you have to think about. The application will be processed. If you don't fall into this category, children over the age of 21 of U.S. citizens, spouses and children of green card holders, married children over the age of 21, and siblings, you have to wait. And there's a whole process that needs to be followed in terms of figuring out when they will contact you for documents and to apply for the visa application, and then when finally you would get scheduled for an interview and then be available to get a green card. Does anyone have any questions for me so far? Okay, so let me talk about a few things. So there are important things to consider. Let's say you have a child who was unmarried and then they got married. Does their category change? Yes, their category does change. So sometimes we have people who've applied, let's say U.S. citizens who've applied for their children. And by the time, let's say it's about a year or so that NVC contacts them and the visa application is in process, they get married. Are they still going to be eligible under that category? No, they're not. They're going to be moved into the married children category, and they're going to have to wait for a visa to be available. So if the status does change, the person also gets changed in terms of the preference category that they are in. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. So I think that kind of sums up explaining the preference categories and who's eligible for what. I don't want to repeat the same information over and over again, but if you are confused and you don't really understand how this works, that's perfectly reasonable. There are a lot of people who don't understand this, and even as immigration attorneys, we have to look into this. We have a question. What if I get divorced during the process? So if you get divorced during the process, we have to take a look at what category you are in, and depending on that category, again, you may change the category that you belong to. The other thing to remember is sometimes this happens. This question comes up often. What happens if someone has petitioned for you and if they no longer want to petition, they want to withdraw? Well, in that case, let's say if it has already gone into NVC, you have to contact NVC and let them know that you're withdrawing the application. Another situation that comes up is the death of the petitioner or the death of the beneficiary. It's a bit complicated when that happens. Usually, depending on where the beneficiary is, where your family member is, if they're in the United States or outside of the United States, and when the family petition was approved, there's a possibility of continuing that petition or requesting a humanitarian reinstatement, but it's very rare. Usually, when you're petitioning for a family member who lives overseas, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to continue the petition for their dependents or other beneficiaries. Do we have any other questions? I'm trying to think of what else comes up often. The other question we have is about people aging out. So let's say you're petitioning for someone and the child at the time of petitioning is under the age of 21. But by the time the NVC center contacts you to process the visa application, etc., they're over the age of 21. In that case, there's something called the Child Status Protection Act. And under this, you do a calculation to figure out what their age is. According to this act, and it's not going to be whatever their actual age is, but whatever their age NVC considers them to be, to see if they're still eligible. This is a great way for sometimes children who do become older than 21 to still be able to get visas and come to the United States. But it really does depend on various factors like when the application was approved, etc., timeline, etc. Okay, we have another question here. Okay, so the question is, what if there is room left on the other higher categories? Can other ones benefit? So if there are unused visas from the higher categories, yes, the other ones can benefit, but usually that's not the case. The case is there are way too many people applying, and sometimes there aren't any visas left over for the other categories. So let me actually share some statistics with you, which might be interesting. So last year, on the waiting list of people, there were about 3,762,891 people waiting for their visas. This is a lot of people. And remember, I told you that the number of visas available is somewhere around 226,000. And then you have over 3 million people waiting. So the likelihood of visas being left over from higher categories is not very high, and that's why there is such a long waiting period, especially for the sibling petitions, because they're at the 4th preference category. So by the time they get to them, there isn't really anything left. Last I looked at the Visa Bulletin, they're taking about 4 months per month to go through the number of applications. So I looked about 4 months ago, and they were looking at October, I think, of either 2017 or 2018, and I looked and they were still on October. So this gives you an indication of how long you could be waiting. It takes a long time. Do we have any other questions? All right, perfect. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to end this session. If you feel like you need more information to fully understand these preference categories and where your family petition is and how to apply for someone, you're welcome to contact us. And I highly recommend also looking at the Visa Bulletin and USCIS and taking a look to see if those websites can address your questions. And remember, the key thing is those charts, and every month they change. So sometimes things are current, which means they're moving very, very fast. Sometimes it slows down, and you'll see that reflected in the Visa Bulletin. All right, thank you very much, and have a good night. Of course, and if you'd like more information about any of this, you can visit our website at www.kaliklaw.com. All right.